Dr. Musser, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Before we get started, just want to introduce you briefly. Dr. Mark Musser is a part-time professor, missionary, farmer, student, and author, and all of this depends on the time of the year. He's even a former pastor and lived in the former Soviet Union for over a dozen years. And we're here to discuss his book, Nazi Ecology, the oak sacrifice of the Judeo-Christian worldview. And really grateful for your time this morning. Is it morning where you're at? No,
it's the evening here, so we're about 10 hours different.
Okay, so it's 11:30 for me. So what is that, 9:30 for you?
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much. Before we jump in, just want to bring attention to the fact that you and I are actually from the same state of Washington.
We are.
I grew up on the eastern side, and whenever I meet people,
That's the good side.
whenever I meet people from, I was in the military stationed on the East Coast. Whenever they hear that I'm from Washington, they assume that I am a secular environmentalist hipster who loves to drink coffee.
Right. Got it.
Is that at all relate to like your upbringing or how you grew up in Washington?
Well, I grew up in the 70s, and so I grew up on John Denver. I don't even know if you've even heard of him, but
Oh yeah,
all the hippie songs and the environmentalism and that type of stuff. It was kind of popular even in school. I mean, they taught environmentalism in school as well. So in those days, I didn't think too much about it. I just assumed, these things were good. And I grew up on a farm. It's a beautiful farm area in Olympia, Washington. Small, but still it's a farm. It was a working farm. We had cows. And I used to get angry with my grandfather for cutting down trees, So anyway, that's all kid stuff. I look back on it now. But now we have lots of adults who haven't grown up. And so we have and they're basically running the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so grandpa can't cut wood anymore, or he's having a hard time doing it. It's always regulated, taxed, whatever you want to call it, or forbidden, for whatever's going on. And it's only going to get worse if people keep on going along with this stuff. I mean, if they keep on compromised with it, we're almost compromised out and we're in deep trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you went to Evergreen State College, which over here, that school has quite the reputation for.
Right. Well, there's lots of bureaucrats that are now running the country from Washington, D.C., from the Evergreen State College. And they're also in the state of Washington, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So as we dive in, I am not I'm not trained in history. I'm not, but I am an avid reader, and you might be the only person who is among, maybe, I don't know, you tell me, who has written about the Holocaust and Nazi Germany in such a light as you do in this book. And so let me give it a shot to try to give like an overarching 50,000 foot view, because it's a lot. And so today, a lot of historians sort of neglect the belief system of Nazi Germany. Is that true?
Right. And, I mean, this is our problem. So people don't know what National Socialism was.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know the beliefs, and they don't take them seriously. So there's really no discussion about it. And then when you start looking at what they actually believed in, then you can draw the parallels of what's going on in our own country pretty quickly. It's not that hard to figure out. Yeah.
So you explain that they have a coherent set of beliefs, and it's not only industrialism and racism that led to the Holocaust.
Well, the industrialism, the industry is not I know it's very popular and people have used it, but the industrial nature of the Holocaust, I mean, this is not the right metaphor. I mean, the proper metaphor of, in my view, of anything connected to the Holocaust should be connected to some nature mysticism. Okay, the Nazis were nature mystics. I mean, whatever you want to call it. People go back and forth. probably the best book that really summarizes it is The Nature, Religion, and National Socialism by Robert Polis. I probably don't say his last name correctly, but he wrote a book back in the 80s, and he discusses the general nature religion of the Nazis. And that doesn't necessarily mean they were environmentalists, but they believed that nature was the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole point of the master race was to get it in tune with nature. And this is part of the whole point of social Darwinism, to get in tune with nature so that this will cleanse our blood. Eugenics is connected to that, and we're going to help the natural processes along through studying nature and studying, some guys were sort of nature mystics in a sense, like Himmler, and they were pantheists a little bit strange with strange ideas. Hitler was supposedly more scientific, at least he thought he was. At least he claimed it was. Other guys were sort of in between, going back and forth. But National Socialism was a nature religion, is what it was. I mean, it was a secular nature religion. Mm-hmm. And that's the best way to encapsulate everything, which would include environmentalism. And underneath that nature religion, okay, the reason why they wanted to kill the Jews is because they viewed them as unnatural. Mm-hmm. They viewed the Jews as trying to conquer nature. We could spend all night looking up the quotes on this. I mean, and even the Fuhrer, Hitler talked about this, is that, the Jews are giving us this worldview where we're going to conquer nature. And within the Nazi mind view is that we need to go along with nature to get into our social Darwinian laws so that we don't self-destruct ourselves. Mm-hmm. With the Jewish people, because they have a backward worldview steeped in the old Judaism of the Bible, okay, they weren't progressive, okay, and so this was part of their, I guess you want to call it progressivism, is connected to their social Darwinism. And industry did play a role, of course, with National Socialism, but what people don't realize is that a lot of their industry was going to be corralled, or was supposed to be controlled by, at least in theory, by what today is called sustainable development. The Nazis were the originators of sustainable development. They're the first country in the world to practice it. I mean, Hitler was going to cover, Ukraine with windmills. I mean, this is, sustainability did not start, just a few years ago. No, this started back in the 1930s, and the Nazis were the first country in the world to start it. They actually do it. They actually tried it. You can sit and criticize them for this and that and the other thing, but you can criticize a lot of things that are going on today too for all the same reasons. I mean,
yeah.
How green are windmills? I mean, for crying out loud, they're not very green at all. I mean, they cover up vast landscapes. Okay, the solar panels are now doing the same thing. They're very land intensive. I mean, and then what are you gonna do with these monstrosities? And when they're all done, you have to replace them. They're huge. They're like buildings. And so we don't, at least cities used to have their place. Now, I drive across eastern Washington. Now there's no place now where I can't see a windmill somewhere. That kind of stuff is kind of what the Nazis were into in terms of their industry. And their 4-year plan was supposed to be a sustainable development plan. I mean, you can sit and criticize it and say that, because it's a war plan, but I got the quotes. I mean, you can tell me all about it, but that's what they thought they were doing. And so when it comes to the nature religion of the Nazis, I mean, they were trying to advance Europe beyond what they considered to be this Judeo-Christian heavenly mindset that was not doing us any earthly good. Okay, so it's way up in heaven, and they're giving us false values that are not related to nature. And we need to return back to that. And they held the Jews responsible for getting us out of the Greco-Roman Empire. And of course, the Christians weren't helping us either. They looked at Christians like just being another form of Judaism. And we'll come after them after the war, after we're successful. I mean, that was sort of the plan. And so yeah.
Can I ask, the title of your book, Nazi Ecology, can you define, define ecology and Nazi, and then what do they mean together?
Well, the study of ecology means the study of nature. And this was actually coined, the term was coined in 1866-67 by Ernst Haeckel. he was really the father of what we call German social Darwinism. He was also a strong environmentalist, one of the first environmentalists. So right at the very foundations of the environmental movement, you have racism and environmentalism, biology, social Darwinism all connected together. And it was all into a holistic one, which is how they viewed. That's the whole point of the nature religion of National Socialism, but even of Germany in general. Everything is in a holistic one, and we cannot allow anything from the outside, from heaven, any heavenly values, Judeo-Christian values that come from the transcendent outside. We cannot have that inside because it's like an infection that needs to be cleaned out. And that really was at the heart of a lot of practices that they were involved in when they decided to destroy the Jews. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but I got lots of quotes on this, and it's not something that happened overnight. I mean, it's really a couple hundred years, okay, in which all these things developed over time. So my metaphor that I like to use is the oak sacrifice. And ancient paganism, basically, the oak tree was something which the pagans valued. This is where human sacrifice was accomplished underneath the oak trees. This was done for fertility purposes and for the sake of power. And if you look carefully at National Socialism, it was basically a fertility cult brought up to date. So eugenics is really nothing more than a fertility cult. I mean, it's all the same. Even the stuff going on now with AI and the environmental movement and technology, it seems like that the Nazis were into those same things. I mean, you could sit there and say, well, what does technology, the Nazis, have to do with environmentalism? Well, what's going on today? It's the same. Okay, all the same people that care supposedly about AI and eugenics and the improvement of our technocratic worldview. Okay, working with environmentalism was something which we're doing now today as well. So it's the same kind of a problem. John Denver, for example, he loved NASA. I mean, he loved to fly. I mean, he died in an airplane crash, and he actually wrote the song when NASA blew up. When one of the rockets during the Reagan era, didn't get, 1986, I think it was. I can't remember exactly the time, but it blew up, and so he wrote the song to eulogize the people that died. So these things are not necessarily contradictory. And this is really, a lot of it is rooted in Germany, even with regard to, the Werner von Braun. Okay, he's the rocket boy. Okay, and he was all into environmental ideas too. So these things are not necessarily inconsistent. Industry, at least the technocratic version of industry, where a National Socialism is going to control industry to the point where we can have a sustainable economy, a sustainable environment, a sustainable race. Okay, all the things that they were concerned about, and they need to get rid of these Judeo-Christian values, and the Jew played a central role in that whole discussion. So that's what my book is about. I believe that the Nazis love oak trees. I mean, we could spend all night talking about that all day. Hitler, gave an oak, basically Hitler himself didn't, but the Nazis gave an oak tree to every gold medal winner in the 1936 Olympics. Jesse Owens walked away with 4 of them. Glenn Morris, another American guy, had another one. Some of these trees are still alive. They planted oak trees all over Poland. Every birthday for the Fuhrer, for Hitler, they planted oak trees. And even with regard to the Holocaust, you have some oak imagery going on at some of these death camps that I think is connected to the whole thing. So what the Nazis wanted to do was have a big human sacrifice. And in the process of sacrificing human beings, they will get back to nature. This will make them more fertile, more eugenic, and more strong. And this will give them not only power, but also beauty, the beauty of nature by getting back to nature. So I think the oak is a better metaphor to describe the Holocaust than what they call the industrial nature of the Holocaust. Number one is that where most of the Jewish people died, okay, these death camps, in Poland, where the Nazis ran these camps, it overlooks the fact that most of these camps were very primitive. I mean, there's nothing industrial about what was going on. I mean, they basically set them in barns.
Mm-hmm.
They died of cold and hunger and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was terrible what they did. And you know, the other thing too is that you know, basically Nazis were putting all kinds of people in outdoor camps everywhere. It was a big, gigantic outdoor camping complex for prisoners, political prisoners, as time went on. And of course, the Jews were singled out for what later became known as the death camps. And you know, very primitive operation that was going on. I mean, yeah, they gassed people with Zyklon B, which is an Auschwitz, for example, which was a pesticide. But I mean, it was very primitive. People lived very difficult lives and didn't live very long.
Yeah, I think what you did a good job convincing me of was that the Germans, the Nazi Germany, viewed the Jews as having disrupted nature, that
Right.
they reduced nature to an economic commodity, is I think
Right.
that's what you quoted, and their racist tendencies weren't necessarily because the Germans thought they were physically superior, but because they were more aligned with nature and their natural connection to the soil, to the trees, to the black forests, and
they also believe the athleticism too. Okay, I mean, you know, there's all kinds of stuff about nudity they were involved in. At least the proto Nazis were, even with some of the National Socialists as well. They were into the athletic things. Leni Riefenstahl, for example, she made this famous, you know, documentary called Olympia. You know, that's our capital city in Washington State. Anyway, you know, she did a documentary that's even today is amazing. You know, of the 1936 Olympics, and so they valued the natural man, okay, as being somebody that is strong, and we have to get back to this. The problem with Jews, and of course with Christianity too, is that we take care of people, and and so we're nice to people, and so this actually ruins the blood, so that diseases enter into the community, enters into the body, and so when you start taking care of people that are weak, it weakens the whole body. And so they were actually very concerned about this from a scientific point of view. We said eugenically, we have to be strong, and we can't. Nature teaches survival of the fittest. This stuff about doing ministry to weak people is not. It has to go. This is not what nature teaches us, and so this is, you know, really at the heart and soul of what they were thinking when supposedly the most civilized country in the world, the most educated country in the world, was doing, you know, all these things. I mean, how did they get there? I mean, this idea that Hitler's just a madman just shows up out of nowhere and takes over the country and destroys that. This is just foolishness. It has nothing to do with the real situation that was going on in the academic halls of Germany for over 100 years. They were blaming the Jews for this and that and the other thing, but the anti-nature tendencies were probably among the strongest that is sort of ignored. And the Nazis absorbed that.
Yeah.
And they took it in. And one of the things to get back to our, when I was at the Evergreen State College, and this is why I wrote the book, and I didn't think about it at the time when I went to Evergreen State College. So I became a Christian when I was young, in high school. And then I go to Evergreen State College. It's nearby. It's, you know, near the place where I live. And so I went all 4 years. And they were very anti-Christian. Okay. And the first year I took all ecology courses. That's normally what happens. You take courses back in those days, political ecology, 32 credits. And they put all the credits into one course. It's like fascism, really. You fascistically put everything together into one. And so then they will divvy up the credits in, you know, the way that they would have some credits for biology, some for writing papers, you know, some for English, some for environmental history. So that's how they did it. But it was all one class called political ecology. And one of the things that really surprised me as a young man is that they were blaming Christians for ruining the environment. And the major concern, it goes back to Genesis chapter 1, and God has made man in his image. Man's above nature. He names all the animals. And so this has led to a dominating view of nature, which has now led to the earth being an ecological shambles that has to be fixed and returned back to a more healthy state. Okay, so this is what I was hearing on a steady diet, you know, coming from this school. from the classes that I was taking. Jesus, for example, hated the wolves. Okay, this kind of stuff was routine. Okay, so when I listened to all that stuff, I didn't really know what to do with it. Young Christian guy, put it up on the shelf. Well, later on, I found out that the Nazis, or not the Nazis, them too, but the Germans were saying the same thing about the Jews for over 100 years before the Holocaust even happened. So it was all part of the same discussion you had with the Jews, the bankers. They're turning nature into a commodity. And this is what's leading to the destruction of nature. And, we need to get people more sustainable, back in tune with nature through eugenics, sustainable development. Yes, we're going to have a war right now, and so we have to develop more than we want to right now. But after the war, Hitler had plans to scale everything back. I mean, at least according to some of the quotes. I mean,
Yeah.
You can read lots of different, quotes from the Fuhrer, but that's just one quote that I read.
The fact that ideas have consequences, and these ideas just did not appear out of nowhere. You say that they're German romanticism, existentialism, environmentalism, and nature worship. Am I missing any? That those are all kind of like the tributaries that fed this one river?
Sure. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, you've got lots of different, little creeks and little rivers that feed into to the Amazon before it's all said and done. And I won't even make fun of what's going on at Amazon. They sell my books, but I mean, you've got all kinds of sustainability going on with that. And the guy that owns that is super rich. He's flying around in jets. Okay. And yet he's pushing the green movement. And you're looking, this is just absolute hypocrisy. Okay. And why are we listening to these people? It's really strange, but that's what we have going on. And the same type of hypocrisy was going on also inside of National Socialism. So we should not be surprised if you look at carefully what's going on now, and you look at back some of the things they were doing back then are very similar. Green building, this was basically developed by Albert Speer. I mean, he was the Fuhrer's favorite architect. You had Hermann Goering. Yeah, he was into hunting, but he so was Aldo Leopold. He was a hunter, and basically he was the father of what you would call deep ecology, and that's another tributary. So, and then you have Himmler. Okay, he was basically a environmentalist, and he was also a nature mystic. He was also vegetarian. Okay, Hitler was a vegetarian. People debate this, but for the most part, he was a vegetarian. He may have gone to some state meals and went along with just to be be a statesman and eat meals that he normally wouldn't eat. He didn't have to. And so then you have Rudolf Hess was also a nature mystic. Okay, and he was a strong vegetarian. He was into environmental. He was basically running the environmental groups that were going on. Rudolf Hess back in those days. And see what's going on is that the history of not just Germany, it's in England too, but primarily in Germany, it had its own unique flavor, and it seemed to become more powerful than other places. So first of all, you have a movement called Romanticism. So, and this is the idea, kind of a romance with nature. And nature is more important than a human being. Nature, and the feeling you have in nature is more important than reason, than human thought. Okay, so what's going on is that you have before this, you have the worship of reason and the Enlightenment. And then Romanticism was sort of like a backlash to the worship of reason. We're emphasizing reason too much. And they believe that comes out of Christianity because of the emphasis of doctrine and truth. And so the reason, the Enlightenment is too controlled by, Christianity. So we need to move away from that. And we need to have a love affair with nature, so to speak. And it's all about feelings. Okay. So that's what we call German Romanticism. And the idea is that the holistic one versus the Bible, which is transcendent, where God comes from the outside and he's different. Okay. And we want everything to be together. And to like a happy family, nature is all one happy family. This is how Romanticism views the world. Then out of that, you have Arthur Schopenhauer, another German, you have a number of Germans that were involved with Romanticism. Goethe, even Kant had a lot of romantic ideas. And Fichte, I can't pronounce these guys correctly. There's a whole slew of them. Even Hegel had some romantic interests, here and there. And then out of that, and of course, Schleiermacher was the theological romantic. He's sort of the spiritual Protestant mystic, but basically he emphasized natural theology versus the Bible. So it's the same kind of a problem. And then out of that, you have Schopenhauer, and he wants to fix this. The emphasis on feelings, that's typical of Romanticism. It's too touchy-feely. It's kind of a little bit too girly. Okay, so he's going to make it stronger and emphasize will. What's really true about nature isn't thought or even feeling; it's will. Nature is all about will. So what matters is not your thinking, it's not your thought, it's not your reason. What really matters is will. Okay, and so this will become almost cult-like with regard to National Socialism, the triumph of the will. Leni Riefenstahl, we already mentioned her. She made a documentary called The Triumph of the Will. And this was developed through Nietzsche. Okay, and Nietzsche was another tributary of this whole discussion where he emphasized, again, will even more so than Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer was very anti-Semitic. Nietzsche was not. He was anti-Christian. Okay, but basically the same ideas were being fomented by both. It's just that Schopenhauer blamed the Jews and then Nietzsche blamed the Christians. Okay, but basically the same doctrines were being juxtaposed against both groups. Many of the romantics were anti-Semitic. Kant was Immanuel Kant, probably the most important philosopher in the last 300 years. I mean, he was a super anti-Semite. I mean, he would blow a gasket every time he started talking about Jews. You'll never see this in his writings, but this was true in his lectures. And he just stopped thinking and blew a gasket. Okay, and so then you have that's existentialism. And of course, along with will is existence, right? So you emphasize existence, this world only, this holistic world. Okay, that's romanticism. And then it's only this existence, not the outside. And so they denied anything transcendent from God, from heaven, from the outer world. So existence, that's all that really matters. And Heidegger is going to take that, Martin Heidegger, the other philosopher, and sort of turn existentialism into a super existentialism, where he says just let being be, like let things be. And we won't mention John Lennon in that song, but where you don't touch anything, you just let being be. Because what happened with reason supposedly ruined ruined nature. Okay, and then we have the feelings, and of course with that leads to all kinds of problems with the human being. And then we have the will, and the Nazis got carried away with will so badly. Martin Heidegger was a Nazi, but then after the war he thought about it, and so he said, well, what really is existential isn't really will or feelings per se. It's just let's just let it be. So now the will is destroyed. See, so the mind of man, the worship of reason basically is gone. I know a lot of people don't realize that, but enlightenment's been gone for quite a while. I know there's some guys that are atheists today and this and that and the other, but most people are not. They're usually pantheists, or we're even going back to polytheism to some extent. Now it's getting so bad. So then you have and then of course with existentialism you have the will. And this was a very important nature doctrine too. I mean, Nietzsche's Superman was a guy who was close to nature. And so with the Nazis, I mean, they took Nietzsche's Superman doctrine, and they believed that they were the Supermen that were going to bring about what Nietzsche was talking about. I mean, you can sit and criticize it and all that kind of stuff, but that's what they thought. And so the first philosopher that Hitler loved the most was Schopenhauer. There's your existentialism. And then Nietzsche was number 2. Okay, and so the existentialism was very strong. Martin Heidegger, he tried to play a bigger role that he wasn't allowed to, but he's a philosopher. He was the most important philosopher of the 20th century. He dominates the 20th century, and he was a Nazi, and he never repented of his Nazism. And even today, they have to admit it now. A lot of people have been forced to admit, his National Socialism, but he dominated all of our academic operation going on in America and the West since the 1960s.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because here in the United States, when you hear the word socialism tossed around, it's not really well defined, and it's like, hey, the government owns the means and productions of commodities, but you often hear that like socialism.
And nobody does that today. I don't know of anybody that even does that today. I mean, there's no government that I'm aware of that where everything is owned. I mean, China, I don't know what the connections are, but they allow a lot of business. Okay, so I don't even think there's any what you would call any pure communism that even here in the Soviet Union it doesn't exist. I mean, it all died, okay, in the 1980s. And so what you have now is sort of a mixture, okay, of communism, socialism, and capitalism. And what that is fascism. And it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's what fascism is corporatism, okay. If you want to, people talk about corporatism, well, just a couple of years ago with our COVID stuff, we got Pfizer and, a couple of these big companies that were basically in bed with the government, and they made billions of dollars, okay, selling all their stuff to us that didn't do us much good. But anyway, that's what corporatism is, where the big corporations are in bed with the government, and this is a huge problem now in America and in the West. It's been in the West, it's been in Europe for a long time. Now it's in America now too.
Yeah, I mean, you have politicians who claim to be like democratic socialists, like Bernie Sanders or like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They're pushing for socialist agendas, and something you hear all the time is like on the Republican side saying we will never be a socialist country.
Well, we already are.
Do you think that communism with National Socialism is downstream from that socialism, or is it? Because one of the criticisms today on why a lot of conservatives are against socialism is because they say, oh, it's just downstream from that is communism. But in your book, you say the Nazis despised communism and capitalism.
Right.
And so is there a difference with
they considered them both Jewish? Both capitalism and communism were considered Jewish operations. That's why they hated them. Run by Jews. I mean, communism, of course, Karl Marx was Jewish, okay, and many of the original Soviets after World War I who converted, the Tsarist regime into communism originally were Jews. Not all, but many of them were. See, communism basically is communism over class. I mean, so the main thing is over class, and what they wanted was a classless utopia, the future, rich and poor are gone, and everybody's going to be one, big happy family without class. Okay, with the National Socialists, they wanted the 1,000-year Reich. It's like a false millennial Reich. So the communism has sort of a false utopia. It's like a kingdom of God on the earth without class. And then with the Nazis, you had socialism wrapped around race socialism inside their own country. And connected to that would be also nature as well, because nature teaches social Darwinism. And so nature and race, they were socialist about that. In Europe, you have all kinds of different socialists. I mean, they're socialists about everything. It's almost like if you look carefully at all the different parties and all the different ideas, including, the Green Movement. Okay, there you have socialism over the Green Movement. They have the Green Party, which, by the way, a lot of people don't know was actually started originally by Nazis. People don't know that in Germany, but that's a sad fact. It's true. Even the money connected to it was connected to previous Nazis. So just like in Athens, for example, there was a God for everything on the street. Well, you have a socialist for everything in Europe. I mean, so it's hard to define. And today, it's the pink movement. We have sort of a fascism wrapped around the homosexual movement today, and so this is another aspect that maybe we're hitting rock bottom, with regard to what kind of socialism we can have. So it's a pretty trashy socialism. Things are going on now in America.
Yeah, I mean, I love this quote in your book, which kind of I think hits the nail on the head, and it says regarding researching Nazi ideology seriously, and you say, not only will such an investigation remove the simplistic caricatures that many people have with regard to Nazi socialism, but it will also expose some troubling similarities between Nazi yesteryear and today's environmental movement. People do not want to be told that their beliefs, particularly when it comes to nature and modern environmentalism, were actually harbored by Nazis.
Mhm.
And that just kind of blew my mind, because when I
Right.
look around, all the central tenets of society today, at least that are being pushed in the United States and around the world, are, well, is it going to harm the environment? Is it going
Well,
to disrupt nature?
no,
And
right. I mean, the EPA is running America, and then you have these multinational groups in Europe. I mean, Club of Rome. I mean, of course, and a lot of these guys are rich guys. I mean, it's just so much hypocrisy. But anyway, right. I mean, yes, everything is about nature. Nature first. I mean, this is what the Nazis taught. It's a Nazi doctrine. Nature is first. In the state of Washington, there was a group of terrorists, okay, that they were called Earth First, and they caused a lot of problems.
yes,
Before 9/11 took over, and when the FBI still had some common sense, the number one terrorists inside the country were environmentalists.
you can also, that's a great point. One thing that you see now happening is around the world, and you allude to this in the book, that like when you have an ethic based on nature, there's nothing sacred or too sacred not to infringe upon it. And you've seen all these 20-year-old, 30-year-old environmentalists going into museums, and they're splashing orange paint over sacred art, or they just spray painted Stonehenge, for example, in protest for what we're doing to, the earth and how we're harming it. And so it's like they don't see a $65 million painting from 500 years ago as being too sacred to vandalize in the name of the environment.
Well, I mean, they view nature as sacred, and that we are trampling all over nature, and so they are trying to get attention to the fact we will continue to act this way, which is a form of, a little form of cruelty, maybe not like real terrible terrorism, but it's not good. I mean, it's actually pretty cruel. And so they're trying to get people's attention to, we have to, get everybody in tune with nature and stop the global warming apocalypse, and all this kind of stuff, So, and they're running our corporations very strongly today. That our regulation, our countries, our corporations are very regulated. The corporations, they don't even fight them anymore. They sort of kind of used to, but not anymore. A lot of guys just gave up. Some people are all for it now, of course, inside these big corporations. And they just have to go along, and they're really expensive. I mean, people have no idea how much money environmentalism costs. I would say 50 to 75% of the bill for everything you pay in America it's a markup of environmental costs. For example, in the state of Washington, okay, where we're from, this was a study that came out 25 years ago by the University of Washington, which is not, a right-wing, group, whatever that term is. Okay. They said that up to, I think it was like 50% of there's like 50 to 60. I can't remember now exactly what the numbers were. It was really high. It's either 50 or 60% of the cost of a home was all wrapped up in environmental red tape. Okay, this is when people are complaining that a house in Seattle cost $400,000. Okay, now it's just, we're way up there. It's outrageous now. Okay, you give me those numbers and let me look at what's going on, and probably the numbers are going to be a lot worse. Okay, and then you the gas prices. Okay, and the food. Okay, I mean, They're regulating gas, outrageously. Okay, we're paying all kinds of money to stop the global warming apocalypse, which is not going to happen. And the government is going to stop global warming about as good as they stopped COVID. Okay, I mean, it's like the 4-year plan. It's like the 5-year plan. The things that they're doing, it's not going to work. Okay, but they have faith in themselves that they can accomplish all these utopian things.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is our problem. They at root is that they have rejected the Judeo-Christian worldview, but they have their own apocalypse. Okay, so they're all worried about global warming. Okay, well, and this is going to destroy the planet. I mean, and there's even today politicians are even giving us dates, setting dates like Benny Hinn, for crying out loud, politically. We're going to die in 5 years. Okay, and the environmentalists have been saying this for 100 years, even longer. Okay. And this just goes on and on. Okay. And so we have all kinds of trouble with this, and too many people have gone along with it. But the costs of environmentalism are very high. And,
I never really thought about it until reading your book. There's a lot of threats to Western civilization, to
they're attacking it. They're getting rid of the foundations. Okay, when taking down dams. Okay, and they're just getting started. They took down a little bit bigger dam in Oregon. They want to take them all down.
Yes,
and then give you a windmill and a solar panel.
Yeah, there's nothing they're willing to not do.
No.
When I think of, like, for example, radical Islam, for example, that is a worldview that is historically antagonistic towards Christianity. However, they still have a high view of their God, and nature is submitted to it. And so they have a high view of the family. They have a high view of many things, and there's things that still remain sacred to them. Whereas with environmentalism, there's no area of your life they would not intrude upon if they had their way with the world.
Well, it's because the natural world is sacred. So it goes back to the same.
Yes.
And we have to stop this. Okay. So they believe that Mother Nature, whatever you want to call her, Gaia, that she is sacred, and we cannot touch her. So, I mean, you can have sex with anything that moves today. Okay. But you cannot touch Mother Nature. She's a virgin. Okay. And then you have to keep her that way. So this is the kind of stuff we have going on, at its most basic. It's lunacy. Okay. But here we are. And so many people have compromised with this movement for so long that they've taken over. Okay. And at this point, I don't see how we can get out of it now. I mean, it's so overwhelming. I got to know about the connections with National Socialism is that I worked for the Building Industry Association of Washington for a number of years. And before global warming became a big panic, they were all concerned about stormwater.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with water when it hits a roof and goes down the gutter, and then it gets down to the your lawn, and then it goes out into across your pavement, and you've got pollution on your pavement, and then it goes out to the road and gets into the streams. So stormwater was a huge concern, and they spent a lot of money on this, and there's lots of money that's still being spent on stuff like that. And then when you build a house, what happens is you have to tear all the soils up, and this leads to erosion, and all that dirt supposedly goes into the rivers and streams and lakes. And so, they were all concerned about that type of stuff. And so I had to study these rules, try to help the builders get educated about, how to get ready for the new rules, and then also complain about the rules because I acted like a little lobbyist. This is when I found out that one of the major gurus of stormwater management was Alwyn Cipher, and he was an SS Nazi. So I wrote an article about some of this stuff, and the state of Washington blew up. I mean, they got really angry and mad. The newspapers and all kinds of things happened. That's been about 15 years ago.
Was that the Seattle Times article that said distorting Nazi history?
Right. Actually, David Postman, I enjoyed the interview with him. I mean, first of all, the first time I would have had any kind of interview like that. And of course, he's a very seasoned, interviewer. But the interview itself, if you actually read the article, was actually pretty fair. The problem is the title.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, he kind of, it's the title is what made it look like that, that everything I was saying was simply not true. And that's really not the case. I mean, look at a number of books have come out talking about the connections, the green connections in National Socialism. The question isn't over if they were, the question is it significant?
Mm-hmm.
One of the books is called How Green Were the Nazis? Okay, well, but we can sit there, that question goes on and on. I mean, how red was the communists? I mean, they had to give up on their communism under Lenin because people were starving, and they had to go back to capitalism for a while until Stalin, finally took over and went back to even worse than what Lenin did. I mean, so that kind of stuff, it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
So there's a record that the Nazis were very green in some respects. Is it significant? I mean, that's more of the question. Did they really care about it? I think they did. People show up all their inconsistencies, but I can spend all night talking all day about the inconsistency of the environmental movement today. It's the same kind of a problem. It hasn't gone away. It's pretty much the same stuff. But all the things that we see today in environmentalism was all born, and politically speaking, in National Socialism. So before that time, you had sort of a nature romanticism, existentialism. People valued nature over the church. They valued nature over, the worship of reason, which has led to our industrial revolution that's not doing us any good, is ruining nature. So you had a lot of that stuff sort of bubbling underneath the surface. But the National Socialists were actually some of the first. They were the first ones to really do something about the problem, politically speaking. So 1933, they passed for example, an animal rights law. That's one of the first things they did. This was done for Arthur Schopenhauer. He blamed the Jews for animal cruelty in Europe. So that and he was like Kant. He would blow a gasket talking about this discussion. And so the Nazis passed a 1933 animal rights law that specifically forbid Jewish kosher slaughter. Mm-hmm. So the first attack on the Jewish food supply was 1933 with a green law, which they passed.
Yeah, there was a fascination with animals.
Right. They were all right. They all loved animals. Hitler,
you pointed out, loved wolves.
Right.
And it was after reading your book that I was watching a movie last week about, it's called Guernica, about the bombing of Guernica in northern Spain, which was carried out by the Nazis.
I see.
And in the movie, so that took place in like 1937. In the movie, the lieutenant colonel for the airborne German soldiers, there's a couple scenes where he takes out his binoculars and is appreciating this eagle that is flying. And I thought that was pretty symbolic because it showed their fascination with animals, and like you just pointed out, like the level of importance that they put even above human beings.
Yes, no, I mean that's the whole point of then the Nazi passed the Nazi hunting law in 1934, Hermann Goering, that basically said exactly what you just stated, where people and animals are sort of viewed as the same, on the same level. And a lot of the ideas behind that Nazi hunting law to control hunting was rooted in that. That was in 1934. 1935, I think, is probably the most interesting in the sense that they passed what they called the Right Nature Protection Act. This is where environmentalism, the paper chase for environmentalism began. So where if you wanted to do anything, build anything, suggest anything with regard to industry, whatever it might be, you have to start doing what they called environmental effects reports. And this is now routine now. I mean,
yes,
it just happens all the time. Before any job you do, construction, you have to do all kinds of environmental planning, and this and that and the other. So even that was born in Nazi Germany, 1935.
Yeah. Do you think?
Yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me. If you look around, especially the West today, and I think it was forget the name of the man who said it. He was before C.S. Lewis, Catholic man. But basically, he said that you can tell a lot about of a society and how it treats its animals versus its children.
Well, that was Schopenhauer.
Schopenhauer.
Well, I don't know about children, but Schopenhauer, his whole point is that you can judge a society by how it treats its animals.
I was in Best Buy couple or about a year ago now, and there was, it's kind of funny actually. So there were these two dogs. First of all, I don't know why you're allowed to bring a dog unless maybe it's a service animal into.
Dogs are everywhere today.
Yeah. And one dog was sniffing the other dog, and the owner was really upset by this. And he looks at the man and says, "Hey man, do you mind? This is a service animal. It's probably an emotional support animal." But so the guy walks off, and the owner whose dog was sniffing the other one was really upset because, and he looks at me because I'm the closest guy standing to it next to him, and he goes, "Can you believe that guy?" And I said, "Honestly, sir, I don't think either of you should be able to have your dogs in here."
Yeah.
And he looked at me with such disgust. I think he would have looked at me not quite so badly if I had smacked the child.
Right.
But the fact that I criticized the fact that he brought his dog into an electronics store, that was like the worst thing I could have ever said to him. And he cussed me out. He said he's more likely to get a disease from me than a dog. And so I think he truly loves animals more than he would a fellow human being.
People have much better relationships with their animals and dogs today than they do with each other. Okay, this is a huge problem in our society. Why are people so tied to their pets? It's because they have no relationships with other people anymore. I mean, look I'm a farmer. I love animals. This, I don't have any. I like it. Okay, but it's out of control. Okay, and see with Schopenhauer, what really gets going is that instead of love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, that's the Jewish view of the Old Testament law. Jesus updates it. Sacrifice, for somebody else. Okay, so that's sort of the Christian view of love. Okay, or you sacrifice for someone else. Now it's you love your animal. That determines how good your society is. And I mean that's going backwards. I'm sorry. Okay, it's going to lead to nothing good. And one of the things that people don't realize during the Holocaust is that you had. This goes back to the animal rights law that I already discussed. So on the same trains, okay, where Jews were being, corralled and put into these trains, okay, and then stuffed into these trains terribly. And of course, like a cruel joke, I mean, how many Jews can fit into one train car? Well, the answer is one more, And so they stuffed these cars full of Jews. On the very same, and then they sent them to the various death camps or some concentration camp along the way to get there. On these very same trains, you had animals, and those animals were treated according to all the rules and laws that the Nazis required. Treated very nicely. They had the proper food. They couldn't be too. They had to have some room to move around. This and that and the other. Okay, and so on those very same trains, they're stuffing Jews in the cattle cars like you're just an animal that we don't even care about. And then on those same exact trains, animals were treated much better than the Jews, and then people didn't even see the problem. But they're just walking, they're doing their job, going back and forth, and see what's going on up here is nothing up here in the mind to tell them that there's something wrong here. And their minds, this is from a Holocaust writer, much better than me. And he said, how come they couldn't see the problem? He says, because their minds were too far gone. Yeah. This is what was going on a massive scale in Germany, okay, in the 1930s and 40s. And the Holocaust didn't just happen out of nowhere. Okay, there's nothing going on up here. And nature worship is why there's nothing going on up here.
Yeah.
Okay. So they started treating people worse, than the animals. And so this is a much serious, bigger problem than people think it is.
Yeah, I work in a public high school. I don't teach history, but I asked the kids in kind of in preparation for this interview, um, what do you think caused World War II? And a lot of them lump in the Holocaust as to one of the major causes. And I think if you got a public school education, that's probably what you were taught, that these were two events that are really just one event. Do you think that the World War II and the Holocaust should be understood as two separate events?
Yeah, look, I mean, look at National Socialism, as we've already sort of talked, is a very complex movement. Okay, and any simplistic caricatures of what they were doing is just, it's very unserious. I mean, it was a very complex movement. Okay, yes, really at the end of the day, the Jews are at the center of World War II. What the Nazis were doing. I mean, the whole point of what they were trying to do was stop what they considered to be Judeo-Bolshevism, which was communism. And what they didn't like about it, also that I didn't mention earlier, was the universal nature of communism, which they wanted to be socialism in their own country according to their own race, which they felt was incorrect. And the universalism, they said, goes back to, again, the Jews. So the Bible gives us a universal view of humanity, creation. That's not true. It's a fable. So if you look at nature, we have the different races, and you have the different, the different, I guess, species, you want to call it that, and so they compete with each other, for strength and for survival of the fittest. And so that's what we need to be doing, even from a human point of view. Politically speaking, this is what has to take place. And so that was a lot of the what you would call the influences or the inspiration to really get going with World War II, because I mean Hitler was planning on war and more war, because this is how the human being is. It's what we see in nature, and we're going to have to practice the same, because if we're going to be consistent with nature, then we have to do likewise. And this is why wolves were his favorite animal. He loved them. And that's the other thing we didn't talk about, but Nazi Germany was the first country in the world to protect wolves. That was in 1934. They didn't have any wolves. I think they do now, but back then they didn't have any. Mm-hmm. They were the first country to protect wolves.
Why did they want to do that?
Well, because the whole point of the predators, okay, is a sign of regaining, health of a nation, mm-hmm. in their view. And environmentalists today, I mean, they love the predators more than they do the other animals. Okay, when I was a kid, environmentalism was more like conservationism, which I had a less problem with. This is sort of the Teddy Roosevelt version, where you have they're taking care of the elk and the deer. Okay, and they're almost like cows. Okay, the buffalo. We can bring those guys back, but after Aldo Leopold, who brings us deep ecology. And by the way, he visited Nazi Germany in 1934 and 35. And he was very impressed with many of the things the Nazis were doing with regard to with their green movement. And he even says as much. He had some criticism here and there, but for the most part, he said the Nazis were actually doing something about the problem, not just talking about it like everybody else. So after Leopold, basically it starts what you call the Never Cry Wolf cult. He's saving the predators. So now they're more concerned about predators. And so like the grizzly bear, of course, the polar bear, of course, bringing in the wolves back into Yellowstone. I mean, and these are timber wolves. I mean, they're not the original wolves that were even there. They're monster wolves. A lot of that stuff, sadly, was born again in Nazi Germany. Aldo Leopold complained about America has to get away. This is what he said: the Abrahamic concept of the land. Where did he get that idea? He wrote that in the Sand County Almanac in 1947. He was in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. I mean, I don't think it takes too much to figure it. Maybe he figured that out on his own, maybe. But there's lots of stuff going on here that people are not thinking about clearly.
Yeah, I saw that in your book. You bring up how the Nazis, they just despised the whole notion of a shepherd, because a shepherd protects his sheep from the hostile forces of nature.
Well, I don't know about the Nazis per se, but the environmentalists in England, the Romantics there they were very concerned about that. Yes, right.
The seeds of the Holocaust were planted long before World War II.
My argument is this. Okay, Christians have, they have persecuted the Jews for, initially the Jews persecuted the Christians when Christianity began. Okay, when Christianity became, what you would call, I guess, compromise with the state. Okay, then they started to persecute the Jews, and they never let up. And so most of church history has been anti-Semitic, very sadly to say. I mean, a very strange operation, but it's something what a lot of Christians did. I would make the argument that really what's going on is that paganism is anti-Semitic by nature. And when God started to save pagans, okay, they got saved, but they kept their anti-Semitism, and they didn't allow the biblical record to cleanse their mind from such foolish ideas, in various areas. So what they did for many centuries, and many pogroms of the Jews were, very evil, very cruel. Would not allow them to be in society, this and that and the other. Among the so-called Christian countries, the feudalism of Europe. So with the Holocaust, things change. These aren't just pogroms. This got serious. I mean, they were killing people, and they were killing people on a large scale. And my argument in the book is that the reason why this happened is because of the secularity added a godlessness to the whole situation, where there was no controls anymore. And there's nothing going on up here that would prevent them from carrying out these cruel activities against another human being.
Yeah.
So what happened is that the anti-Semitism of the church becomes secularized by the entire society. And so it becomes also, upgirded by the academics. I mean, it wasn't just Hitler. I mean, for crying out loud, anti-Semitism was very strong. And it wasn't just in Germany. I mean, Austria was very, very anti-Semitic. In fact, some of the worst perpetrators of the Holocaust were Austrians. They were all involved with those, especially particularly involved in death camps, were Austrian Nazis. By the way, Hitler was too.
Yeah. Have you seen some of those quotes that are held up, and it's a very anti-Semitic quote, and it says like, well, who said this? And the options are Hitler or Churchill. And sometimes it's Churchill saying those things. And so it was, you're right, it was like anti-Semitism was really widespread throughout Europe and even in England.
It is now today too. I mean, it's coming back, and it always was just kind of hidden for a while, but now it's coming out in the open again. And our institutions are becoming anti-Semitic in America, which,
If I describe the time that we're living in this 4 years post-COVID epic, it sort of feels like people are starving for something with meaning. People are looking everywhere they can to get truth. And so, the podcast that we're starting is called the Great Reassessment, because people everywhere are kind of questioning what they've been told about a lot of things, and believe it's affecting every, health and the family, nutrition, what we know about history. And so that's why I was so intrigued by this book, because it's like, you are telling the truth, but it's also count against the narrative that is so pervasive that no, it was just industry, it was just racism, it was nothing more than that. Don't look behind the curtain, because what you'll find is that a lot of these central tenets of their belief system are alive and well today.
Right. I mean, it's like, it's like when you blame industry for the Holocaust. Okay, it's like that's what paid for it. Okay, the question, why did they do it? That's the more important thing. I mean, so I know we hear this a lot, the industrial nature of the Holocaust, and yes, they killed millions of people. There's no question about that. But when you look at how they did it and how primitive it was, industry really is not the proper metaphor. I mean, and so I think the nature metaphors are better.
Yeah.
And so the oak imagery, we could spend a lot of time talking about what the different oak trees, what it meant. There's a big discussion there, even with some of the death camps. One of the things that did happen, I'm not sure which camp it was, death camp, either Treblinka or Sobibor, could have been both. After the Jews got killed and destroyed, by the Nazis, and those, like Treblinka was close to 1 million people died. Sobibor almost 500,000. I don't know the exact numbers. But the Nazis, they planted lupin flowers on top of the Jewish graves. And lupin flowers are wolf flowers.
Yeah. In Italian, lupo means wolf. Lupo.
Yeah, and then, right. And so, excuse me, Hitler used to call the SS his pack of wolves. Okay, and so they were the ones in charge, of carrying out the Holocaust. So they were like wolves running loose, cleaning up the herd. This goes back to the never cry wolf cult. Is that the wolf supposedly gets rid of all the weak animals so that the herd becomes strong. So basically, Hitler had his pack of wolves, the SS, to eugenically clean up the race to make them strong, and the wolf metaphor is a better one to use, even more so than industry, because that's exactly what he called. Literally, he called them that's my pack of wolves.
I have one final question, and I just want to thank you for your time. It's been a true pleasure. I'm going to ask you to play the prophet here. Given everything we've talked about, and that what role environmentalism is playing in today's society, what do you think the future holds? What other tributaries and rivers do you think are forming at this very moment?
Well, the old days of racism and environmentalism are over. What we have now is anti-humanism and environmentalism together, which, in my opinion, is no better. It may, in fact, be worse before it's all said and done. If you look at the Old Testament, for example, historically speaking, the nation of Israel struggled time and time again with a cult, a fertility cult called Baalism. And Baalism, you had to sacrifice yourself, for the fertility of nature. And sometimes they would sacrifice children along with this. And they would do ascetic practices to beat up the body, for the sake of fertility of nature. And you would not value yourself as much as you would value your fertile gardens, the fields, and the things you were working in. And then you would practice different forms of pagan cultic activity along with it. And so sometimes things were bad, and sometimes they were a little bit better, and sometimes they got really bad. And so that's part of the historical record, and we're somewhere in that scenario. And I think we're heading towards something actually getting to be really bad. So for example, the Baalistic cult, which was a nature worship cult, idolatry as well, that took 200 years to wipe out the northern kingdom of Israel. It takes time. Like I said, this idea that the madman Hitler shows up and then all of a sudden we have all these problems. This is very unserious and has nothing to do with real life or real history. It took 200 years. The southern kingdom of Judah lasted 400 years. And so, they had revivals, they would recover, and then they would kind of go back. And then it finally bottomed out with Babylon. So they had to go into exile because, again, their Baal worship. So America, the West, is pretty deeply into what I would consider to, Baal worship, a couple hundred years. And so where are we in that? That's an interesting question. We're going to find out.
Yeah, you use the word ecological asceticism. People today are sacrificially, in the name of environmentalism or caring for the earth, electing not to have children. I saw a billboard the other day that said stophavingkids.org, and I went to the website, and it was an anti-humanist website that talked about all the benefits that will happen and how electing not to have children is the greatest thing you can sacrificially do for the earth. And it's almost like, yeah, we are inflicting the wipeout upon ourselves.
They keep on saying there's too many people. There's too many people. I mean, at some point they're going to act on it. They probably already are in many ways. It looks to me like Europe and the Democrats in America sort of want to set up at least in Europe. I don't know about America. I mean, America's not good either, but almost like a eco security state. That's what they want. I mean, the bio would be the health, eugenics, and then mix this with the environmentalism, and they want to control everything. You have these 15-minute cities that they're talking about in Oxford, for example, where you're not allowed to go 15 minutes outside of your own area. And if you do, it has to be done by special government permission. Well, they had to give up on that idea, which is, a lunatic idea. And so apparently they're going to be charging people if you happen to, go farther away from your home than necessary. So that thing with the COVID, everybody's home sitting. I mean, this is sort of like they want to start doing this with ecology too. They would like to, but they got away with it with the COVID because people are fascist about their health. A little bit. It's more personal to them, but it's harder to get people to go along with the green pulp and Mother Nature type stuff because it's not. People know that this is problematic for a variety of reasons. And so we will see. I mean, I like I said, we're somewhere in that continuum between something that's not good right now and something that could be really bad. And if people continue in this direction, I mean, there's going to be consequences. So it can't be avoided.
Well, Dr. Musser, I just want to thank you for your time. I've loved this conversation, and thank you for writing this book that was probably, hard work is just probably doesn't even do it justice, but because there's over, 1,500, 1,600 citations.
Well, I've read a lot, and I've read a lot from, I did a lot of my, I knew a lot about communism, okay, because of my Evergreen State College days. I knew nothing about National Socialism, really. And then, so that has been corrected. And I interwove a lot of, basic Holocaust research and, National Socialist history, and I interwove it together with that book, with the Green Movement. And the reason why I did that is because, I've read a lot of books now on National Socialism, and almost every book that you read, pick up about National Socialism will have some little story about some green thing, some green movement type of discussion that the author thinks is really strange or doesn't belong here, but it's there. So he kind of puts it in there, but he doesn't know what to do with it. So basically what I've done, I've taken all those books and I coalesced them, that have this little, supposedly a strange discussion about, the green movement. Okay. And so I put them all together and put it into a holistic, a better whole, like a picture, giving you a better picture of what's going on. And really, it's not something strange that was going on. This has really played maybe like a strong undercurrent. It wasn't the main thing, but it played a pretty strong undercurrent in their thinking. It darkened their understanding, and it helped to explain why it was they did the cruel things they did to other people.
Well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, and really grateful for your time. Hope you have a good night.
Okay, thank you.